Throughout galactic history, the concept of perfectly cloning a forceful being has consistently proven to be unattainable, with all attempts to do so either failing outright or resulting in the creation of dangerous and unstable monsters. Grown from the genetic material of Darth Vader's secret apprentice using Kaminoan-based cloning methods, Starkiller was the latest in a long line of abject failures due to the aforementioned difficulties in cloning Force sensitives. Unable to separate the flash memories of his progenitor, Galen Merrick, he developed an obsessive infatuation with Juno Eclipse, Merrick's former lover. Escaping the Kaminoan cloning facility in Vader's personal starfighter, Starkiller eventually made his way to Cato Nemoidia, where he liberated the captured Jedi Master and Rebel General Rom Koda before attempting to reunite with Eclipse. However, Juno Eclipse was abducted by the Empire and taken to Kamino, a scheme to lure Starkiller back to Darth Vader. Leading the Rebel fleet to Kamino, Starkiller carved his way through the cloning facility before coming face to face with Vader himself. Narrowly besting the Sith Lord, Starkiller was convinced by Rom Koda to spare Vader's life so that he could be interrogated and eventually executed. Vader ultimately escaped, though Starkiller's fate remains unknown. Grown from the genetic material of the then Jedi Knight Luuke Skywalker using Spiratai cloning-based methods, Luuke Skywalker was the apprentice to the mad clone Jedi Master Jaruus C'baoth, and was essentially intended to be Luke Skywalker's replacement should C'baoth fail in his attempts to convert Luke to the dark side of the Force. Masking his presence within C'baoth's castle on Wayland, Luuke watched as his master once again attempted to sway Luke Skywalker to no avail. Enraged over the young Jedi Knight's defiance, C'baoth incapacitated the former Emperor's hand, Mara Jade, with Force Lightning, and commanded his thrall to attack his genetic template. Brandishing the same lightsaber Skywalker had lost at Bespin, Luuke and Luke stood at a near-even match, as the clone had much of the same proficiency in application of lightsaber dueling as the original Skywalker, though Luuke's presence caused a pressure to form in Luke's mind, which gave the clone a slight advantage. Realizing that Skywalker was in danger, Mara Jade, having recovered from C'baoth's attack, decided to even the odds, jumping into the fray and impaling Luuke Skywalker with Leia Organa Solo's lightsaber. Luke Skywalker would later inscribe his confrontation with Luuke within his personal datapad, citing his unease over the fact that a near-exact duplicate of himself could become so horrendously evil. First, we compare their physical attributes. Starkiller and Luuke Skywalker were identical clones of Darth Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Merrick, and the Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker. Merrick being a human male of 17 years of age at the time of his death, and Luke Skywalker being a 28-year-old human male when Luuke was created. While differing lifestyles and training would result in differences in physical capabilities between Merrick and Skywalker and their clones, it should be noted that many of Starkiller's physical capabilities were more or less on the level with Galen Merrick, and Jaruus C'baoth purposely went out of his way to make Luuke as close to his genetic template as possible. the only discernible differences in appearance being Luuke's lack of a prosthetic right hand. Even accounting for the exaggeration in the game, Starkiller's demonstrations of strength, agility, and stamina were prodigious, regularly cleaving adversaries in two with his lightsabers and contending with Darth Vader's cybernetically augmented strength. Obviously, shrugging off otherwise lethal blaster wounds and lightsaber hits is just a game mechanic, though Starkiller can still take an inhuman amount of punishment. Endurance and strength training being major elements in his training under Darth Vader. While Luuke Skywalker was capable of employing quite deft and dexterous acrobatic evasions and positional transitions, clearly possessing strength and endurance beyond that of a normal human male, he has never demonstrated these attributes to a degree beyond what was commonplace among other trained Force wielders of his caliber. Whereas Starkiller's physical capabilities were pushed to the absolute limit of the human body. At the end of the day, both possess similar levels of output, but Luuke can't match Starkiller's hardiness. I award Starkiller the physical edge. Now we compare them as martial artists and lightsaber duelists. Despite his highly unconventional style of training, Starkiller was a talented lightsaber duelist. His retraining under Darth Vader advancing quickly due to the inherited memory flashes of Galen Merrick's combat skills and experiences. However, whereas Merrick's lightsaber technique was a personalized hybridization of the Juya style, Vader steered Starkiller towards Jar-Kai dual-blade fencing, an ancient dueling style originally designed to accommodate steel blades, but was later modified for use with the lightsaber. His study of Jar-Kai was further reinforced by his specializations in the Naiman and Ataru styles, a hybridization of all the previous lightsaber forms in addition to various other combat disciplines. Form 6 was a well-rounded jack-of-all-trades fighting style, which offered training in both force-based attacks and dual-blade fencing. Ataru was the fourth form of classical lightsaber combat, an extremely aggressive fighting style based around elaborate but disciplined blade work and a heavy reliance on force-assisted acrobatics and deathly integrated punches, kicks, and other physical strikes into one's lightsaber sequences. In addition to his specializations in Forms 6 and 4, Starkiller's technique also contained elements of the Xian style, the most visible application of the style being his frequent usage of the Xian reverse grip. Whether engaging swaths of Imperial troopers or members of the Imperial Saber Guard, Starkiller's offensive technique was strong and dynamic, combining aggressive flourishing blade work with mind-numbing speed and agility. Thanks to his extensive training under Darth Vader, he was able to build up his physical strength to the point where he was able to comfortably handle a lightsaber with only one hand and allow for the use of power blows, compensating for one of Jar-Kai's most glaring shortcomings as a martial art. Befitting a high-level practitioner of Form 4, Starkiller demonstrated a high level of skill with randomized, acrobatic-based swordplay and was an expert at integrating physical combat techniques into his lightsaber sequences. When fighting completely unarmed, Starkiller appeared to favor the use of grapples and disarmament techniques, as demonstrated by his ability to disarm Imperial riot troopers and attack them with their own electrostaffs. His technique was further reinforced by his heavy and varied integration of force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, employing everything from basic force pushes and pulls to stagger enemies, to channeling telekinetic shoves or bursts of force lightning along his blade as he struck, significantly bolstering his range of attack. Despite Starkiller's specialization in Jar-Kai, he was still capable in the use of a single blade, likely another holdover from Galen Merrick's memories. When on the defensive, Starkiller appeared to favor Shien as his primary means of protection. He was an expert with blast deflection, batting aside blaster bolts with casual ease and using aimed deflection to take out desired targets. While perfectly capable of stonewalling other trained Force wielders with deft swordplay, Starkiller was highly skilled at employing cross or shunt blocks as they are referred to in-game, staggering opponents and setting them up for immediate counterattacks. As a tactician and strategist, Starkiller was, well, I hesitate to call him average, as he was actually quite intuitive and innovative in his approach to combat. He primarily focused on off-balancing and overwhelming his adversaries with unconventional forms of attack, and was perfectly capable of changing up his approach when his primary methods failed to yield the desired results. Which is more than I could say for a certain Sith sorceress who appeared in my previous matchup. In my view, the best example of Starkiller's tactics was his duel with Darth Vader on Kamino. As noted in the Force Unleashed 2 novelization, not long after the commencement of their duel, Starkiller concluded that he was incapable of defeating Darth Vader outright in a lightsaber duel. The best he could realistically hope for was a stalemate. However, instead of succumbing to Vader's superior might, Starkiller chose to change the rules of the engagement, deliberately allowing Vader to disarm him, knowing the Dark Lord would try to force him to surrender rather than just killing him outright, and used the resulting opening to catch Vader off guard with his Force abilities. While much of this victory was likely achieved thanks to both the existential circumstances at play and Starkiller's familiarity with Vader's tendencies, the fact that he acquitted himself as well as he did against such a powerful Sith as Vader demonstrates his flexibility and adaptability, allowing him to contend with one of the greatest lightsaber masters of his era despite his gross inexperience. However, he was ultimately held back by the weaknesses engineered into him by Darth Vader. Vader trained Starkiller for combat with large-scale groups of assailants and lightsaber duelists who employed substandard techniques and styles. He was not trained to deal with duelists who balance their options and change up their approach to suit the needs of the moment and the opponents. Duelists like Vader himself. Starkiller's skill set is similar to Sith Lords such as Darth Bane and Darth Kaitis, in that he lacked any real variation as a swordsman, his edge in single combat having more to do with magnitude rather than skill or ingenuity. What makes him such a devastating opponent is how he employs these otherwise conventional techniques in such an unconventional manner. Drafting a comprehensive analysis for Luuke Skywalker is a bit tricky, as the character has only been depicted in one serious lightsaber duel with an opposing Force wielder. However, there is enough information presented in the Last Command novel and the comic that I was able to construct a set of statistics around him. Jaruis Sabayoth trained Luuke to be identical to Luke in every way, the only difference being Luuke's fanatical loyalty to Sabayoth and the dark side of the Force. As noted in the Last Command novelization, Luuke possessed the same approximate technique and level of skill as a lightsaber duelist as his counterpart, allowing him to anticipate and counter all of Skywalker's attacks while simultaneously striking out at his weaknesses. Considering that Luke Skywalker was relatively fresh off the heels of holding his own against Darth Vader, albeit through existential circumstances rather than pure skill, Luuke's ability to match him quite literally blow for blow proves that he is a true force to be reckoned with. At the time of Grand Admiral Thrawn's ascendancy, Luke Skywalker's lightsaber form was a highly sophisticated hybridization of the Djemso, Ataru, and Sorisu styles, meaning that Luuke's own fighting form was no doubt built along those same principles. While there is a precedence for Luke's level of improvement in the time between Return of the Jedi and The Last Command, I think it's safe to say that Skywalker's actual technique remained consistent up until his training under Darth Sidious in Dark Empire. However, the novel notes that Luuke Skywalker fought extremely aggressively, preferring the use of strength-oriented power blows and vicious overhand strikes, which suggests that Luuke had a stronger predilection towards the Djemso style than his more level-headed counterpart. Developed in answer to the perceived offensive deficiencies of Sorisu, Form 5 was built around the tactic of following up defensive maneuvers with immediate offensive counters, seizing the initiative rather than passively responding to an opponent's actions. Unlike the Shien variant of Form 5, which was designed with blast deflection as its primary focus, Djemso was optimized for use primarily in lightsaber dueling. While it lacked the strong technical focus of its brother, true masters of Djemso were considered to be on par with Jedi battle masters due to the versatile nature of their techniques. When on the offensive, Luuke Skywalker's blade work was direct and to the point, based around rapidly executed power attacks and aggressive full-body movements that allowed him to bring his strength-oriented Djemso moves to bear. While not often employed, Luuke proved himself to be a capable acrobat, likely drawing on the elements of the Ataru style he garnered from Luke Skywalker. Like his progenitor, the influences of Djemso and Sorisu were felt heavily in Luuke's defensive technique, though Djemso, of course, was his primary response. His typical conduct in a lightsaber duel was to follow up defensive blocks and parries with immediate counters rather than committing himself to pure defense. The only time Luuke ever assumed a committed defensive posture was when he was under duress, such as when Luke Skywalker viciously assaulted him when Sabayoth attacked Leia Organa, forcing the clone to break off his offensive and give ground. While some may see this as a demonstration of Luuke's inability to defend against a committed offensive, I see this more as an example of Luke's rage granting him a temporary boost in power as it did with Darth Vader more than anything else, as the two once again stood evenly matched when Luke's rage was abated. In regards to combative tactics, Luuke Skywalker was little more than a blunt instrument. He was devoid of any real sense of individuality and showed no recognizable sign of emotion until the end of his bout with Skywalker, when he shrieked and attacked Mara Jade in a fury after a view screen blew up in his face. That being said, he has demonstrated a fair amount of on-the-spot combative ingenuity, such as when he employed the saber throw to slice a platform in half just as Luke was about to land on it, which caused the Jedi Knight to perform an unsuccessful backflip onto the ground. On the whole, Luuke Skywalker was a highly effective and lethal lightsaber duelist. He may have been little more than a weapon forged to carry out Sabaoth's will, but he knew how to apply himself accordingly. As lightsaber duelists, Starkiller and Luuke Skywalker are very similar in that their effectiveness in single combat is banked primarily on how they mixed and matched their relatively run-of-the-mill techniques, achieving victory through attrition rather than skill. Where the differences arose was in how they went about this. Luuke Skywalker was a pure lightsaber duelist, a dedicated martial artist who preferred a physical victory over all else. Starkiller was more of a general-purpose martial artist, balancing out between lightsaber combat and force abilities, integrating the two in order to maximize his combat effectiveness. At face value, Starkiller's more nuanced skill set provides him with a considerable advantage, especially given Luuke Skywalker's predilection towards lightsaber combat above all else. However, Starkiller is held back by his lackluster dueling skill, his lack of variation as a swordsman forcing him to rely heavily on his force abilities to make up the difference. Again, not unlike a certain Sith sorceress I talked about in my previous matchup. While Starkiller has shown some variety in his intensity and dedication to his attack, his core technique ultimately remained consistent, and he simply can't effectively compete with Luuke Skywalker's ferocity. For all his cunning, Starkiller's tactical ingenuity didn't really carry over to his conduct in single combat, whereas Luuke Skywalker's tactical tunnel vision meshed surprisingly well with the straightforward nature of his personal style. Luuke's defensive moves are strong enough to intercept Starkiller's rapid strikes, while his immediate offensive counters would distort Starkiller's timing and break his momentum. While Luuke obviously couldn't bring on the kind of power one would expect from someone like Darth Vader, in the end, I do feel that his focused offensive would be able to eventually overcome Starkiller's Xi'an-based defense. Both may have held their own in single combat with two of the greatest force-wielding martial artists of their own respective eras, but only Luuke was truly a match for Luke Skywalker, whereas Starkiller was irrefutably Darth Vader's inferior. To be fair, while there is a discrepancy between Thrawn-era Luke Skywalker's level of skill versus Darth Vader's, since despite what many may think, Luke wouldn't surpass his father for several years to come, I still view Luuke's performance against his counterpart as the more impressive of the two, since it was already made clear that Starkiller only survived his bout on Kamino because Vader tried to force a surrender instead of just killing him outright. Luke Skywalker during the time of Return of the Jedi may not have had the skills to defeat Darth Vader outright, but he was a highly skilled and varied lightsaber duelist whom Vader himself noted stood head and shoulders above the majority of Jedi he had faced, and was easily Starkiller's superior. Luuke Skywalker doesn't share Vader's ulterior motives, and a pure lightsaber duel with Starkiller would most assuredly end in his favor. Luuke Skywalker gets the edge as a martial artist and lightsaber duelist. Now we compare their force abilities. Like his genetic template, Starkiller possessed a strong connection to the Force. In keeping with his optimization towards combat, Force-based physical augmentation was one of his primary skills, allowing him to perform the various superhuman feats of speed, strength, and agility that were fundamental to the practice of Jedi martial arts. Telekinesis was one of Starkiller's primary skills, and he made heavy combative use of it. On the basic level, he has employed powerful force pushes and pulls to blast or push desired targets in the midst of combat. He used force grips for the precise manipulation of objects, being able to lift extremely heavy objects with little effort, and even seizing live targets. He further refined these skills into force-based strangulation and force throw. Throws in particular became one of Starkiller's primary offensive skills, thrashing his adversaries with loose objects, as well as telekinetically guiding his lightsabers along desired trajectories. Starkiller's most overtly destructive offensive ability was the Force Repulse, a gathered burst of telekinetic energy that was released in all directions, causing massive havoc and destruction. However, I believe that the depictions of him being able to utilize such a labor-intensive ability at the drop of a hat, as well as the depictions of him disintegrating targets upon contact, is not truly within his scope of ability, and are instead feats attributed to the mechanics of the game. Going by his depiction in the Force Unleashed 2 novelization, Starkiller employed the Force Repulse all of once throughout the entire course of the book, in a last-ditch effort to kill the remaining Galen Marek clones.
He sought strength from within himself, and pushed outward with all his might. Clones went flying. The empty tubes from which they'd emerged shattered into millions of pieces. Platforms buckled and fell with reverberant crashes. The interior of the cloning tower rang as though struck with a giant hammer. Every muscle in his body shook with the effort of it. The echoes faded, and he felt a peculiar kind of quiet descend. The air was misted red, and every surface was slick with blood. He tasted it on his tongue, and smelled it in his nose.
The use of this power was extremely labor-intensive, requiring nearly all of Starkiller's stamina and focus in order to be pulled off. As such, it's likely that he would restrict his use of the Force Repulse to a last resort. Additionally, as the air was described as being misted red with blood, the implication is that Starkiller partially liquefied their bodies and splattered their guts throughout the cloning facility. If he disintegrated them as he did in the game, the air would have been caked with ashes and burning embers, not slicked with blood. Despite his focus on more overtly destructive Force abilities, Starkiller also possessed a high level of aptitude with Force shields, allowing him to survive the intense heat caused by the atmospheric re-entry of the Salvation during the Battle of Kamino. However, his ability to penetrate the Force shields of other trained Force wielders was all but non-existent. He was unable to break through the Force walls of Darth Vader or the other Galen Marek clones without some sort of distraction, and he was completely incapable of breaking through the shields projected by members of the Imperial Sith Acolyte, who brushed off Starkiller's attacks with contemptuous ease, which forced the clone to fall back on pure lightsaber combat in order to defeat them. Conversely, Starkiller's own defenses against telekinesis were extremely haphazard. While he was capable of blocking most attacks he saw coming, he didn't have a continuous instinctual defense. As a telepath, Starkiller was capable, but nothing to write home about. Versed in the basic mind trick, he was able to influence the minds of weak-willed individuals to do his bidding, and on a few occasions outright erasing knowledge of his own existence. His combative applications of these powers were a lot more aggressive, compelling targets to attack their allies and even commit suicide. Moving away from these somewhat conventional Force abilities, Starkiller possessed considerable aptitude with energy-based Force powers, specifically Force Lightning. In combat, he was able to strike down multiple targets simultaneously, and on a few occasions disintegrating targets outright. While I've already noted how the idea of Starkiller disintegrating targets with telekinesis is little more than a nonsensical game mechanic, doing so with Force Lightning is not an unprecedented feat. Beyond the basic combative applications, Starkiller also made several intuitive uses of it as a utilitarian tool, igniting volatile gases and charging up or shorting out active machinery. However, his lightning was evidently incapable of completely shorting out the electrical insulators housed in Darth Vader's armor, which adds credence to his aforementioned inability to penetrate the defenses of opposing Force wielders. Skilled in the use of Tutaminis, he has been depicted absorbing the energy blast of a Terror Spider Walker and later a bolt of lightning, though the novel heavily implies that he is only capable of using this power when boosted by Force Fury. Also known as Dark Rage, practitioners of Force Fury would tap into his or her innermost fears, pain, and hate and convert them into primal, intense rage. The user would then channel the rage to increase his or her own speed, strength, or ferocity in battle. Though in Starkiller's case, all of his combative abilities were elevated. He was capable of lifting and crushing ATSTs with telekinesis, eviscerate tens at a time with his lightsaber throws, and, as mentioned, employ the highly sophisticated Tutaminis ability. However, as with the Force Repulse, the use of such power was extremely labor-intensive both physically and mentally, so Starkiller's usage of it is limited. Despite being cloned from the DNA of one of the most powerful Force wielders in galactic history, Luuke Skywalker was not an extraordinarily powerful combative Force wielder. As the Force typically manifests itself according to the realities and understandings of the wielder, Luuke's lack of awareness as a single living entity and commitment to the study of martial arts techniques all but crippled his ability to draw on the Force in any meaningful capacity beyond what was typically associated with followers of the Jedi Order. While this is nothing more than loose speculation on my part, I believe that Luuke's absence of any serious Force power was deliberately engineered into him by Jeruis C'baoth. Considering that C'baoth functioned primarily as a Force wielder and was fully aware of the latent power Luke Skywalker himself possessed, I don't think it's that much of a leap to assume that he molded his thrall to lack any real self-awareness, not only to make him easier to manipulate, but also to put to rest any possibility of the cloned Skywalker growing too powerful. As he functioned primarily as a lightsaber duelist, Force-based physical augmentation was one of Luuke's primary skills, enhancing his speed, strength, and reflexes to superhuman levels. In regards to combative applications of telekinesis, there really isn't much to say as far as Luuke Skywalker was concerned. He never employed direct telekinetic attacks in live combat, nor has it ever been established as to whether or not he possessed potent telekinetic defenses. His most notable application of these powers was his use of the saber throw, telekinetically manipulating his lightsaber along a chosen vector, which allowed him to strike targets from a distance or exploit areas of opportunity presented by the environment around him. Despite being staples of practitioners of the dark side of the Force, Luuke has never been observed conjuring Force lightning, nor employing Force-based strangulation to choke someone to death. While he has used Force grips to retrieve his lightsaber when disarmed, that was as far as they ever went. While Thrawn-era Luke Skywalker did possess a limited facility with Tutaminis, such a complex and labor-intensive ability, even at its lowest levels, would be well beyond Luuke's ability to comprehend, let alone utilize. As most telepathic abilities require strong mental facilities in order to be pulled off, whether or not he is able to employ mind tricks is suspect at best. However, there is a sequence involving Luuke's telepathic abilities in the Last Command novelization that warrants a closer examination. During their duel within Sabayoth's castle, Luke noted that his clone's presence caused an intense pressure to form in the back of Skywalker's mind, which kept him from concentrating and committing himself wholly to the fight, which gave his mere adversary a slight advantage. While many tend to chalk this up to Sabayoth interfering in the duel in an effort to foster a favorable outcome for his thrall, the novel notes that the pain didn't let up until the instant Luuke was killed, which suggests that the interference was tied to the clone rather than his master, since Sabayoth wasn't dispatched for several minutes following his apprentice's demise. It also remains unclear as to whether or not he is capable of employing these powers frequently, or if they were simply an irregular side effect of the cloning process, though I am more inclined to believe the latter. On the whole, Luuke Skywalker's command of the Force was raw and basic. While he possessed a reasonably high level of skill with the basic Force techniques common to all Jedi, Sabayoth's programming made certain that he would never be able to pose any real threat to a true Jedi or Sith master. Their aptitude with Force-based physical augmentation ties almost exclusively to their martial arts training, where I've already reached my conclusions. While it is highly implied that Starkiller could only utilize the Tutaminis ability when bolstered by Force Fury, this really isn't all that relevant here, as Luuke wasn't capable of employing any of the energy-based attacks the power was designed to defend against. As far as combative applications of telekinesis goes, Starkiller easily outstrips Luuke in terms of variety and magnitude, skillfully integrating his powers into his overall fighting technique to further his control of the fight. While Starkiller's ability to defend against telekinetic attacks is extremely limited, this weakness, serious though it may be, wouldn't play a major role in this contest, since such overtly offensive powers of this sort did not factor heavily into Luuke's overall fighting method. Due to the lack of information regarding Luuke Skywalker's own defenses against telekinesis, it's difficult to say whether or not Starkiller's inability to reliably penetrate the force shields of opposing force wielders would factor in. Though considering just how spotty Starkiller's showings are, the idea of him casually tossing Luuke around like a ragdoll with telekinesis, or pulverizing him into a pulpy mass of blood and guts with the Force Repulse, seems highly unlikely. While there is some ambiguity surrounding Luuke's ability to subtly attack the mind of his adversaries, all indications are that he was only able to accomplish this due to his connection he shared with Luke Skywalker. as he never attempted to use it when he was confronted by Mara Jade. In addition to his greater level of power and skill at employing telekinesis, Starkiller's advantage as a Force wielder is further backed up by his use of Force Lightning, a power that Luuke has absolutely no answer to and is decidedly lethal. When analyzing and comparing the Force abilities of Starkiller and Luuke Skywalker, Luuke falls short in literally every category. His magnitude is completely usurped. His telepathic powers are mute. His skill and dedication to combative abilities does not compare. As such, I award Starkiller the edge as a Force wielder. And now, the verdict. There are a great many thematic similarities between the stories and experiences of Starkiller and Luuke Skywalker. Both were unstable clones created and trained by extraordinarily powerful masters for a singular purpose: to defile the legacies left by their genetic templates. Darth Vader intended for Starkiller to bring about the destruction of the very rebel alliance Galen Marek helped to inspire, while Jaruus C'baoth intended for Luuke to be Luke Skywalker's final trial, holding to the notion that in facing a corrupted version of himself, Skywalker would recognize the power of the dark side of the Force and join him. However, despite these few commonalities, what we get with these two is the equivalent of comparing a Republic clone trooper to a CIS battle droid. Rather than an inherently superior level of skill, what ultimately decides their effectiveness in combat is the severity of the imperfections that were deliberately engineered into their fighting techniques by their masters. Vader trained Starkiller to be a multifaceted tool, whereas Jaruus C'baoth shaped Luuke to be a simple weapon. As a result, Luuke Skywalker's skill set is much narrower. He never developed any alternative skills to back up his preferred method of lightsaber combat, not because he never needed to, but because he wasn't designed to. However, while these aesthetics severely limited his ability to combat foes outside of the narrow range for which he was trained to engage, his ability to match Thrawn-era Luke Skywalker proves that even with these handicaps, Luuke Skywalker can comfortably contend with lightsaber duelists of the master level. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Luuke's combative use of the Force. As I mentioned previously, his lack of awareness as a singular living entity and commitment to the study of lightsaber combat all but crippled his ability to utilize the Force beyond the basic physical augmentation and grip techniques commonplace among low-level Force wielders. Make no mistake, Luuke Skywalker is an extremely capable and powerful warrior, a true force to be reckoned with even for the great masters of various eras. But he is ultimately little more than a thrall who is held back by logistics. Starkiller may share this emphasis on conventional lightsaber techniques and brute force, but his approach to combat was much more well-balanced. Vader may have attempted to iron out Galen Marek's personality from Starkiller in order to make him easier to control, but he still left him with a fair semblance of free will, allowing him to develop and refine his skill set according to his natural aptitudes, resulting in a broader and more sophisticated fighting method. However, despite Starkiller's range, I feel that Luuke is the more skillful lightsaber duelist of the two, as he possesses viable counters to everything Starkiller is bringing to the table, and has proven that he could match swordsmen of the master level. something Starkiller never fully achieved. Considering that Starkiller's typical response when confronted by other trained Force wielders is to attack them with his lightsabers, this fight would most certainly begin as a pure lightsaber duel, and Luuke would seize the early advantage. However, as soon as he started to gain any ground or inflict any sort of damage, Starkiller would turn to his powerful Force abilities to retaliate. Starkiller is a significantly more skilled and committed combative Force wielder than Luuke Skywalker. And while his ability to outright penetrate the Force shields of opposing Force wielders is stagnant, his advantage still shines through thanks to his broader skill set. While Luuke is capable of employing various telekinetic attacks, all of his observed applications have been very myopic, and he simply can't compete with Starkiller's raw elemental fury. While anything can happen in a lightsaber duel, and it is entirely possible that Luuke could overwhelm Starkiller before he could resort to his combative Force abilities, chances are that Starkiller would be able to fall back on those powers and overwhelm Luuke Skywalker. I declare Starkiller the winner. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this latest installment of the Versus Series Season 5. As always, you are free to leave suggestions for future battles in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys later. You could definitely say that this video was a true Clone War.